Hi, I wanted to introduce myself. I am Andee Fagan, and I am the owner of Andee Fagan Fiber Arts and Photography. You probably see me on Instagram and Ravelry and everywhere on social media as Andee KF. That stands for Andee. My middle name is Caitlin, and my last name is Fagan, so it's Andee KF. For that, I am officially starting a YouTube channel and thought it'd be nice to introduce myself and talk a little bit about my story and where I've come from and where I am now, just so you get to know me a little bit better. I have grown up in New Jersey my whole life. I've always lived a couple miles from the beach, and I absolutely love spending my summers going up at the beach. But at the same time, I lived on a farm. We had horses, and I got to ride, and it was really fun. I did not grow up in a farming area. Where we live is more beachy than farming, so it wasn't very normal to have a farm, but I absolutely loved growing up on the farm. When I was in high school, I was a beach lifeguard, which was one of my favorite jobs ever. And also when I was in high school, my grandmother taught me how to knit. I was always into doing crafts and different things. I used to make friendship bracelets and all the crafty things. So she thought I needed to learn how to knit. So one day she told me she was going to bring me over and teach me how to knit, and she did. And I absolutely loved it. I kept knitting through high school, and then I went to college, and I did not like college. I never liked school. I hated school. I still hate school. And now that my kids are in school, I feel like I'm going through it all again. I wasn't a big school person. But when I went to college, I went for photography. Well, first I wanted to do computers. So I am an exennial. That's the new term that came out for people born between 1975 and 1983. I call it the middle child syndrome of generations. I'll read you the definition. So basically an exennial is people who were born from 1977 to 1983. So it says people born during the specific time period did not grow up in a world where the internet and cell phones were always there. Like the millennials who came after them, exennials can distinctly remember when these technologies emerged. But unlike the older Gen Xers, exennials adapted to new technology more quickly. For example, while exennials did not grow up with social media, they now use it with as much ease as those who did. So when I went to college and I decided my major was in computer science, because computers are cool, and like everybody didn't have computers, and we were just starting that whole computer thing, and I realized I didn't want to sit in front of a computer all day. And my other passion was photography. It's something I have been doing for a long time, and I shot with film then, so it wasn't digital. So I switched my major in college to photography, and I loved it. I was in the darkroom every day. I absolutely loved developing my own film. I worked for the newspapers. I did a lot of freelance jobs. I absolutely loved it. But that was the times where I would go photograph a hockey shoot or a hockey game, and then I would just hand in my rolls of film to the newspaper, and I never saw my pictures. I'd have to wait for the newspapers to come out to see if my pictures were in there. And it was fun, you know, sometimes I get the cover of the newspapers, and it was fun waiting to see, but I never saw my own pictures. So I grew up in that, where it was like doing my film, and then I left college. I hated college. I didn't hate college, I just hate school. I really don't like school. So when I left school, everything switched to, at that time, I had left for a winter break, and when I came back, they were actually demolishing the darkroom, and they were turning it all digital. So I was right there on the cusp of everything converting from film to digital, and I left school. I didn't go back to school. I started working for the family business, which is custom architectural millwork. I started doing anything that needed to be done. I worked in the office, I worked out in the mill, I ran moldings through a molder, I sanded things, I cut things, I typed estimates, I did billing, anything that needed to be done, I did. And so that was in 2001 that I started working there. and I'm still working for the family business, but I'm working from home, which I'll get to. So with the millwork, I was able to continue my photography by photographing our jobs and things that we were doing. But again, it was all film. So I was very lucky to get to work with a professional photographer who we tried to hire with digital to come and photograph some of the jobs that we were doing. And he said, well, you'll come with me and I'm going to teach you how to take the pictures, and then you'll be able to do it. And it was the greatest thing ever. So he took me to quite a few jobs. He taught me all the settings. He taught me about the equipment. And I learned so much about digital photography by working with him. He's a professional. He's still doing photography. His photography is amazing. So I was so lucky to have that opportunity to really get a jump start back into the digital world of photography. All this time I was still knitting, and then in 2006 I met my husband. Well, I got married in 2006, my husband. I think we met a year or two before that. And then we had our first son in 2007, and then our second son in 2009. And I continued working from home and knitting a little bit here and there, but my kids are 17 months apart, so I wasn't doing a ton of knitting. But to go back to when I first started learning, my grandmother had taught me how to knit, which I said earlier, and she taught me how just to do a stocking knit, and she told me the tips were you have to wash your hands, and your first thing you make is a piece of scrap. And she told me to use cheap, crappy yarn. And so I did. It came out so wonky and horrible, and she told me it wouldn't be anything, and it was nothing, but I still have it. I was just trying to find it, and I can't find it. I know it's here in my house somewhere. So it was a little piece about 1 foot long, and then I went from that, and I just did not stop. I started making like scarves and all kinds of goodies. I picked up this book at Barnes & Noble's, and I was going through here, and you can see, like, look at my kids scribbled all over it, the back scribbled all over it. So I went through this book, and I did I went through it, and I did, I followed the directions for how to make a seed stitch, how to make a 2x2 rib, and I just went page by page until I got through lace, and I did color work, and this book was phenomenal, and I just went cover to cover, and I really learned how to do a bunch of stuff. My aunt, unfortunately, was in an accident. She's okay, but she broke her thumb, and she had to have a rod put in her thumb. And she was a big time knitter, and when she had the surgery, she just couldn't knit anymore, and she hated seeing all of her yarn just sitting around her house, and she gave me like all of her yarn, and it was good yarn, like really good yarn. To that point I was only using like cheap acrylic and really crappy yarn, and so I ended up giving the yarn that I had to a charity, which they were very grateful to have, and then I had all the yarn from my aunt. So for years I used that. I knitted blankets, I knitted all different things. I had a book. She had given me a book. It was about 10 pages, and it was a blanket, and each square was a different stitch. And I did that. It was like a 12 by 12, and I made a whole blanket out of all different stitches. So this is all before Ravelry and Instagram and social media and YouTube channels. So once I just knitted through everything, and I ran out of yarn, and it was really sad because we didn't have many local yarn stores. We had one, and then it closed down. And even our craft stores all kept closing down. So now I have my 2 kids, and I'm working from home. I'm still doing the millwork, working like 7 days a week, basically. Since I was set at home, my dad kept dropping off work for me. I stick with the knitting. I kind of started running out of yarn, and so I couldn't just pick it up, and I wasn't as motivated, especially with the kids running around. And then my parents decided they were going to get alpacas. So they started going to all these farm stores. Growing up, like I said, we were on a farm. We had horses, and we had some ponies, and we had one pony still standing, and she passed away. And then they decided that, well, they wanted to keep it as a farm, so what were they going to get? And here I've been knitter, and I'm like, alpacas, sheep, alpacas. And it's perfect. So they started looking. My mom had gone to the Maryland Sheep and Wool Festival and came back in love with these alpacas, and they decided they were gonna get some alpacas, and I'm like, perfect, then I can make, you know, use their yarn, I can knit, it'd be great. I thought they were getting a couple. They ended up having a whole breeding program, like award-winning national champions. It turned into a huge thing. But going back, when they started going to look at alpacas, we started going to alpaca farms. And as we were going to these farms, they all had their yarn from their animals. And I got my hands on this alpaca yarn, and my love of knitting came right back with that great yarn. So I started knitting everything. So at this time now, Ravelry was coming into phase a little bit, like a little bit. But we had a weekly knit along with Ginny over at Small Things. So every Wednesday we'd post what we were knitting. And that was a way to see all these amazing patterns. So I had been using that little stitch dictionary that I showed you, and I was coming up with my own patterns. Like I was making my own sweaters, I was making my own scarves, my own hat patterns. I was making everything for myself, and it was great, you know, and I just wear it or I gift them. But then when my parents had the farm store, people wanted to start buying the things I was making. And I'm a selfish knitter. I made them for me. They fit me. I don't want to sell them. So then I started selling the things that maybe didn't fit, or I didn't really like, or didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. So I started selling a little bit of that. And then Ravelry came into full gear. And when Ravelry came in, I saw all the patterns and I started knitting everything. When Ravelry first started, there was a lot of free patterns. So I just got inundated with like, knit this, and now I had yarn because of the alpacas. And so I was knitting everything. And then I kind of hit a standstill. There wasn't really much I wanted to knit. So I went back to writing my own patterns again. Then I started sharing my patterns with the yarn along, and I didn't have them all written. And then I started noticing people like completely ripping them off and selling them on Ravelry. I was like, hey, that's my hat pattern, or that's my scarf pattern, like that I made for myself, and I kept sharing it online. So then I stopped sharing the things that I was making, and I was knitting, and I was bummed out because I was missing out on this awesome community. So in about 2013, I started selling patterns on Ravelry. I started writing them all down and having them test knitted, and then I started selling them, and they took off. And at the same time, I was still doing all my photography, and now with the alpacas, I was photographing the alpacas, and my pictures were getting in magazines. They were on the cover of magazines. It was really exciting. And I've always had a portrait business. I've always taken pictures. I've always done portraits. I've always done like headshots. I've done sports. I do everything. So as I was asked, I was doing it. So my accountant came to me, and PayPal, who I had to register. I was having so many sales. It was like, whoa, you need to have like an ID and all this stuff. And my accountant was looking at what I was doing, and she's like, this isn't a hobby anymore. You know, you need to register this. So I am officially Andee Fagan, Fiber Arts and Photography, LLC. I couldn't figure out how to separate the two businesses because they've been so intertwined. Sometimes I do photography for designers. I photograph my own patterns. It all kind of came together, and I didn't know how to separate the two businesses, so I kept them as one. And I've been selling patterns ever since online. I still work for the family business. I do a lot of photography. I do commercial photography. I do real estate, architectural photography, portraits, headshots, basically everything. So that's been keeping me extremely busy. The pattern writing has been hard because I love writing patterns, but it's like writing a book. It's like writing a novel. And especially right now, everybody wants inclusive in all the sizes. So I've been releasing all my sweater patterns and my pullovers in about 9 sizes. So it takes a long time to have them all test knitted, all the yardage checked. This is one that just came out back here. So it's a long process, and I've been spending lots and lots of time, and I don't get paid for that time, for like the creative time, since I'm an independent designer. So it's been hard, but I basically over the past few months kind of put everything aside and said, I'm becoming a full-time designer. This is what I'm doing. It's what I love. And I've been working my butt off creating patterns and making collections, and I absolutely love it. And I'm really hoping that, you know, I can keep pushing forward and stay in this you know, in this line, because what I love most about photography and what I love most about knitting and knitwear designing is that it allows me to travel. It's a big thing for my family. We have an RV, we have a camper, it's a fifth wheel, and we do a lot of camping. And we love to travel, and I love doing travel photography. I actually have we have a YouTube channel for our camping, and I share all the campgrounds we go to, and I talk all about where we went, and we review it, and it's really fun. It's a fun thing we do with the kids. And so having this job and being a photographer and being a knitter, it allows me to travel and get out of my house. I don't like getting out of my house. Actually, I would stay in my house all day long, but I can travel with my house, so it's totally cool. I love my RV is nicer than my house. Although we're doing a lot of renovation on our house because it was in some bad shape, but we're gonna be fancy soon. But I just wanted to take this time, say hello, introduce myself, give you my like background story before I start posting random nonsense. And I hope you will come along this journey with me. I plan on doing lots of fun videos of different places I go, and hopefully I'll be building my studio. I've said this before, like over and over and over again. I really am hoping to make a nice space that I can always come sit down to and record. I have all the photography equipment. I have areas I set up in my house for when I have clients come over to photograph them. So I'm hoping to focus more on it being a place that I can use for photography I can do photography tutorials. I do knitting tutorials. I would like to have tutorials to go with all my patterns. And I just want to be able to talk about all the things that I'm working on and share them with you and be part of this wonderful community. Thank you for taking the time to get to know me. I hope you'll stick around. If you have a podcast, please comment below so I can come find you and watch you. Because basically, since this is my job, and I'll tell my dad about the millwork thing. I still work for him, but you know. I spend the entire day watching YouTube videos, so I feel like this is the world I live in. This is my job. I do watch photography tutorials, but mostly knitting. So, I mean, I feel like I'm at work every day listening to all the knitters, and I love hearing your stories. I love hearing more about your lives along with what you're knitting. It's so entertaining. It's such a great place to be in, and I just welcome you here, and I hope you stick around and follow my journey. Thank you.